guy that just left here with Switch, we were talking about this guy that's the uncle of the Barges. He was in a group in Detroit called the Peppermints. And one of the guys that sang, other guys that sang lead in that group was named Lee Rogers.
Okay.
Roger Creighton, but his performance name was Lee Rogers. After I got out of high school, he come by my house one day and one evening and asked me to go to this club with him in Woodward in Detroit. So I hadn't been to a club since I got out, since I was a tot. I was too young to be in there when we were doing little record hops and things. So this was my first introduction into the club scene after I got out of high school. And I went to this club in Detroit called The Village. And when the first person I met there was Betty Levette and Walter Jackson. Later on that evening, I met David Ruffin, the Richard Street in the Distance. And I was in awe, you know, because I walked out of high school and walked right back into my childhood dream amongst singers. And before that night was over, I was on the stage. I hadn't sang in 4 years because in high school I was an athlete, you know, from sun up to sundown. I had all special music classes. In fact, Mary Wilson and I, for 4 years, every day in high school, we would have first hour, which was not a regular class, but it was an ensemble, musical ensemble of some of the best singers out of the choirs. And for 4 years, that was our first class in high school. And at this club, I met a couple of guys. Well, this first night, I met a guy named Tommy Stone, who was Norman Whitfield's first production. When Norman was trying to get into it, the first record he produced was on this guy. And I say that because the coincidence, you know, when I got to the company that Norman and he were at, Norman had left and went to Motown, you know, and while I came to that company, he brought me over to Thelma Records, which was Barry's first wife. I went to that company and I was a solo act. He was a solo act. But we were going back and forth to this club on the weekend in the Village, and both of us singing, and then by being there, we would back up other folks and then go out and do our number and come back, and he'd do a number. I'd back him up, he'd back me up. And a couple of months later, another friend of mine that I grew up with had gotten out of the service. And when I ran into him, I took him to the Village. So we were all down there, and this was the guy that I used to idolize. He was a little older than I was, but I used to see him coming through the projects, going to do gigs with his white bucks on, his lavender shirt and white pants and ascot and hair process, and people just watching me. I was like, oh, I would love to do that. And when he came out of the service, you know, we took him to the Village, and he was so happy to be in there. We started singing, and then we turned into a group. We called ourselves Richard Street. We were with Thelma Records, all three of us, and we were backing up a female singer that was on the label at that time, and the song had some connotations of what Gladys Knight and the Pips were about back then. So it was three of us and this girl, and Richard Street said, yeah, we ought to call y'all the Peps. Y'all not the Pips, but we call y'all the Peps, because you know we were dancers really, and performers. But we had a little Pip kind of vibe with this group that this girl was singing, and it kind of had a little Gladys Knight kind of thing. So we were just talking, but that name stuck. So we started working as the Peps, and we became very, very popular in Detroit, you know. And we were always the group on all the shows without a hit record. But everybody wanted us to come and open up that show because they didn't want us to be performing somewhere else. And they were performing.
Was that because of your energy? Because
the energy.
I think it was because of your energy, and because you've got a character. I mean, we've all got characters, but I can just see that there's such a love of music in you that it was just pure energy when you guys got up on stage. And then I want to understand, what was it like the first time you got up on stage?
Well, you know, first for me, I've never been shy.
Well, I can see that probably was.
I've never been shy. I was always like that little kid around with my mom and her friends. She'd say, "You want to hear Joe sing something?" And I'd break out in there and start singing. And then after I saw Frankie Lime and them, I'd be singing the a cappella and turn around and do the splits and get up and take a bow. And give me a quarter and stuff out of there. And I was feeling really good about it, you know. But I mean, I went to a rock and roll show at a theater in Detroit back in 1954, 54, and I was 9 or something like that, and with my mom and her kids. I'm almost 75, and her kids, and her friends, and after the movie they had this rock and roll show, you know, and the headliner was Louis John at that time. So when he was coming on, I was waking up. And I stood up on the seat, and when he came on, he had a microphone right here in his hand, Tough Band. Woo, Tough, the Upsetters, I think they used to be with Little Richard too. Okay. And, but he was singing, and all these people were screaming, and he didn't have a microphone here, he had it over here. And you can hear his voice over everything. And I was just like, at awe. And all the noise, and after that, I knew what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a singer. You know, I was a kid, and you know, my mom was a little impressed because of my youth and you know, just my enthusiasm with that. So, in junior high school, I got into the singing group, you know, and we were calling ourselves the Moroccos. So we started singing for these recreation centers in Detroit. They had this radio station, WCHB, and they were having their very first WCHB Summer Talent Contest, which had all the groups in Detroit at that particular time. And I didn't realize till later on that in the finals there were some people that were very notable that were in that contest. And I think today I say, I won that contest. You know, Smokey was in that contest. He was singing with a group called the Serenaders. There was another group in there, the Sheiks. It's a female group. I can't think of their name, but when the finals came, the winners were third place was Willie Tyler and Lester, who had a little dummy, and he did a ventriloquist thing. He ended up at Motown. Okay. Second place was a group called the Spinners. Oh, yes. And the first place was the Moroccos. And I was like, you know, okay, but now after we won that contest, the first prize was a record to be produced by two guys from a group called the Midnighters, Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. So Sonny Woods and Joe Hunter of the Funk Brothers, the original Funk Brothers from Motown, were producing it. So when we got the record out, it was called Bubblegum, and we started going around Detroit doing record hops, and this one disc jockey, Frank Ernie Durham, every time we would come, he'd say, here come the Moroccos, and he'd say, with Little Joe. So they caught, and they was getting ready, when they released that record, they put Little Joe in the Moroccos, because that's what Ernie Durham, so, you know, we rode with that. And after that summer was over, and this was my last year in junior high school, my mom said, I got some bad news for you, because your singing career has ended. You're going to go get a diploma. When you get the diploma, you're going to have your decision on what you're going to do with your life. Give me the diploma, and you go on into the world. But right now, no more singing. So, but I mean, I picked up on it in high school. I stayed in the choir, in the ensemble, and I sung mostly all the solos all the time. Because I'm going to ask you to give me a rendition before you go type. It's too early in the morning, and you know, I just come from Detroit, so
doesn't matter. I think it's about
I'm jet lagging.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The show must go on.
The show must go on. But anyway, I never thought about who I was going to be. I was always looking at other folks and stealing little things that I can do when I got on the stage, and I was always in a group, just for that little small point in time. When meeting Tommy and those guys at the Village, did I do a solo thing. And a little later on after that, when we were really well known, and some of the guys, Ronnie and Tommy, had families. I worked all the time because I wasn't married or anything, so I was always, when I wasn't working with the Peps, I was working with the Ohio Untouchables, who ended up being Ohio Players, and I was an original Ohio player. When they broke up, it was two groups, Robert Ward and the Ohio Players over here. I started working with Robert Ward for about 8 months, and then Satch came and approached me one time. They were coming to Detroit, and I got them to play on the very first, well, they were the very first thing that they played on after leaving the Ohio Untouchables in a recording studio was with the group that I was with called the Peps. So when they came and we did some things in Detroit, and they got some gigs and they worked here, they would call me sometimes when I wasn't working and come to Ohio, and I go out and do some stuff with them, and then they got a deal from a production company to do an album. So I produced half of the album, but I didn't sign the contract with them because it was one of those booty contracts. So you sign this contract, and we're gonna get you $100,000 worth of work in a year. And I was okay. Think about that $100,000. They didn't say you're gonna make this amount of money. Some places we would travel for 200-300 miles and go in and work 2 nights and make $300-400 a night, and it's 7 of us. But all that was adding up to the 100,000. The last date that I did with them before I just walked away was we did a concert at Wilberforce College we were opening for Bill Cosby. And those gigs, we did another couple of gigs with Gene Chandler that was paying nice money, and so it started to become more of a business to me. And even at that time, I wasn't looking at me. The Ohio Untouchables and the Ohio Players were a group of individual excellent musicians who knew showmanship. They played behind James Brown, they played behind Bobby Bland, they played behind B.B. King, and they played behind the OJs. They were that band at that particular time. Most groups would come through and they would work with that band. So I got with that band, and wow. And when we started having creative differences between myself and the drummer, who was new in the group, the band didn't like to do. The guys that I was with didn't want to take care of no business, so they got this guy, and he was, he had his own concept about what he wanted to do, and he wanted me to be James Brown and Wilson Pickett, but I could do that, but that wasn't, that wasn't my concept of who I wanted to be, which at that particular time started making me think about, well, who am I going to be? I can be all these other folks. And then I ran into another friend of mine who was telling me that one of your greatest strengths is being able to be who you are, but you never did, or I have never seen you do anything that you couldn't do. When you stand on the stage, a lot of folks will go up there and sing a song, and they be all, why you sing that song? You couldn't sing it, and that was Norman Whitfield. When he told me that was just before he was going to make a proposition to sign me to Motown. We just had a conversation, and I had left Ohio Players. I went to Louisville, Kentucky with Harvey Fuqua, who was with the Moonglows. He had a club there. And when I was with the Peps, we used to go there and work a lot with one of his partners. So when I got there, the band was there. They already knew me. So we worked the first weekend after I left Ohio Players. We left there, and then we went to Toronto. We worked in Toronto and Buffalo, New York, for the guy that owned the 20 Grand Club in Detroit. Called and said, I got 10 days because somebody canceled out and I need an act. So do you have an act good enough to come in? So I was like, oh yeah. So I brought the band. We were the Nightlighters then. I brought them with me into the 20 Grand. The last night of the show that was there before us, which was Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers. Now, I'm saying this because all this became that street you walk down and not knowing what you're going to run into.
Talk about that before. Yes.
The last night of that show, Bobby Taylor was performing, and that band was Wah Wah Watson on guitar, who played on every Undisputed Truth record. In fact, when we did the Jackson 5 tour, it was four of us, me and the two girls and Wawa. So we were the Undisputed Truth at that time, and we put a band together to go out with the Jackson 5. But going back now, Bobby Taylor had these 3 girls singing on the show with him and Wawa. And that was the last night of that 20 grand stint. We were in town that Sunday, but we didn't start till that Friday. So in the meantime, we would go in the 20 grand in a day and rehearse putting the show together for the weekend. And after the first night, Norman Whitfield and Clay McMurray come into the show. And after the show, Norman hung around. He said, man, you got another group, huh? Y'all sound pretty good. Came back the next 2 or 3 nights for that first weekend. And then the last weekend, we worked 2 weekends then through the week. And the last weekend, Norman came in on that Friday night. Saturday night, Clay McMurray came by himself because he said Norman was in the studio trying to finish up a couple of songs on the Temptations to release an album. And he wanted me to know that if I left after the club closed that night, if I would stop by the studio with him, because he was in the studio working with Paul Williams of the Temptations. So I went in there and they were doing this song, "Oh girl, why won't you talk to me on the phone? Every time I call you, disguise your voice and say you're not home." And that was an all-night session, and I got a chance to see the Temptation, Paul Williams at that time, and Norman work, And that next Sunday, that's the next night, which was Sunday, Clay came back to the club. Norman didn't come. And Clay said, well, Norman wanted me to ask you if you meet him at the Motown building Monday. I was like, okay. So I was wondering what he had on his mind. So when I got to, that morning when we got to the Donovan building, we went up to Norman's office and we sat in there. He said, look, I got these 2 girls and I'm putting a group together. He said, and I want you to be the front guy in the group. They need a lead singer. He said, but I don't want it to be a group where you're the lead singer and you got 2 backup singers. I mean, that was never my concept. He said, but these girls are very good. And then when he told me who they were, I said, oh, well, I saw them the other week at the end of the Bobby Taylor show. And he started telling me some of the things that they had been doing, the girls had been doing. And they had backed up on Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, Still Waters by the Four Tops, and quite a few other things, that they had done. And I was like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And Norman at that time was #1 writer and producer in the world. So
he was quite a character, wasn't he?
Yes,
that's an understatement.
Understatement. And he was. And when you say character, that meant his competence in what he did. It spoke volumes. And he was that cat quick with concepts and ideas.
Especially his creativity.
Creativity, yes. To be in the room.
Psychedelic soul.
My Lord. Yeah, I mean that's 2 interviews.
That's okay. I'm coming back.
But anyway, Norman took me through the same kind of thing, the kind of question like you asked me about what do you want to do, how you see yourself. I said I never saw myself, and I told him, frankly and straight out, I said I've never worked with females before.
Okay. And how many years was that you've been in the business that you hadn't worked with females?
This was like the 3rd. Let me see. Wait a minute. The Peps. I got out of school in '62. This was '69. This was '70. This was '69 going into '70. The end of '69. And all that time, I only worked with the Peps, Smoke, Heat, and Fire, which were the Peps. We changed the name a few times. The Ohio Untouchables, the Ohio Players, and Nightlighters. All those groups were all male, groups. And professionally, I at that point in time, figured I had my professional shoes on now, especially when the #1 writer and producer is coming to get me to be in a group that he's putting together. I was like, okay. He said, and he explained the thing when I was telling him what my concept was. I said, well, you know, these girls are very good at backgrounds. I say, so I think I got a shot at learning, you know, and he said, good, because you're going to be teaching too, because I want these girls to be lead singers.
But it was interesting when you said you've got a shot at learning, so you were open to,
yes.
You know, they always say, what is it, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, but also, you know, there's always that constant engagement and forth, learning, yes. and
from each other.
From each other,
right.
That's right.
See, so that, you know, that gave me a lot of confidence about the situation, and then not being afraid to, you know, put myself out there with females, you know, and I knew I did not want to have that look of a lot of groups with a guy and 2 girls backing them up. So we started cross-fading. Norman knew that, so what he did was he concepted us that way on record.
Okay.
You know, she sang, you sang, and boom, boom, boom. We became storytellers. We concepted ourselves pattern after the Fifth Dimension,
yes.
Sly and the Family Stone, and Fifth Dimension and Sly and the Family Stone, funky and classy. See, so you know, I figured that we could do that with crossover like that, and then Norman was interjecting what he wanted to put in there, which, you know, just made it morph together very well. Go ahead.
Sorry to cut in, but you know, you talk about the merging, putting from the Fifth Dimension and was it the Family Stone?
Sly and the Family
Stone. Apologies, but their music is very spiritual as well, isn't it? There's a real strong concept and message about connecting with something deeper and outside of yourself, and really embracing that. Because I know for the Fifth Dimension, their music is very, very flowy, very fluid, but it's about love and it's about life.
When the moon is in the 7th house.
That's right.
See, and those were the concept that these girls they were, you know, that was what they really loved. They loved singing like that. So I could work with that, you know. I mean, if I was going to put another group into that, I would say the Friends of Distinction.
Oh yes.
See, because
yes.
I mean, they had, and Billie Calvin and Jessica Cleese were cousins. So they was from the Friends of Distinction, and all of these things, conceptually, we begin to create the image that we, you know, that we wanted to do musically. The very first album, if you listen to it, the second album really was very conscious music, you know.
And that's the word, actually.
Yes.
That's the key word.
Very conscious music, yeah. And we have always tried to stay with that concept, having something to say. You know, we had the very first big disco record with You Plus Me with Taka Boom. You know, so all those things, you know, Norman was just constantly writing those kind of things, and putting into this basket and saying Undisputed Truth. But he also knew that I did a lot of the things, because just before the final group of Undisputed Truth with Norman, we did psychedelic soul. We had the wigs on and the white face, and the white face, which prompted Kiss.
Okay.
You know, they came to the Starwood and caught us, and the next thing you know, they were doing it. So what we tried to do was put a show together, and the guy at the club there with us and Kiss. But we had become so popular, at first they said yeah, then they backed out. We ended up doing a lot of clubs that regular R&B groups didn't do, like the Whiskey, you know. And I'm gonna say it like this: outside of the tour that we did with the Jackson 5, where we made unconscious money, just when we were doing that concept with the wigs, we worked so much that, I mean, it was very, very, very profitable. But it gave me an opportunity to be versed, you know. And I had 4 other people there. 2 of them were very good at crossovering into concepts. The V was the young lady. She kept it together and straight up, because she had a character vocally that could that could be considered real. In other words, she was not trying to be anybody, but she had a lot of feeling and soul and a very, very good voice, you know.
It's interesting, sorry to cut you again, but it keeps coming back to this thing about being yourself, because we were talking earlier outside of this interview about artists today. There's no judgment, you know. It's no judgment really, I'm just really into old school. But there's this whole essence of be yourself. When you get up on stage, you are yourself. You come from this essence of this is who I am and this is what I want to share and give and offer. And what do you feel, Joe, are the attributes, you know, back in your day, what were the attributes that kept you grounded, that kept you coming from this heart and soul place, rather than being sort of superficial and aesthetic, you know, having all these superficial aesthetics about yourself?
Well, I must say that the first time that I started going in the studio with Norman Whitfield was really the very first time that I really felt a fear, or it wasn't so much a fear of actually doing it. It was a fear of not having the confidence of doing things that I hadn't heard anybody else do. You know, Norman would come in the studio with the music, and the tracks were so prevalent and so strong. I was saying, how am I gonna get on that? Norman would just say, you just get in the pocket and ride.
He helped you to step up, didn't he?
That's
pushing you into the better aspect of yourself.
That was where my learning of who I was, because when he wanted me to do certain type of things or songs, and with certain, he would mention, he said, with smiling faces, he said, well, give me a Jerry Butler kind of vibe. You know, so that put me, it was my comfort zone.
Brilliant.
You know, Norman has seen us sing many times, and every time I would do something with the impressions I did, or Jerry Butler would do, the audience would just totally respond. You know, because we were this group, high energy group. Jerry Butler was cold and you know, and just the Iceman. You know, he was just, and the impressions were just storytellers. You know, we were storytellers, and we turned it into skits. We turned it into, we would close the Apollo Theater singing "I've Been Trying." And
so you sing what?
I've been trying to understand why. Can I be your only man? A ballad. So when we went into the Apollo, and the band leader was, he was like, "Y'all gonna close with that?" See, they didn't seen us perform, and it was like, okay. So the guy said, "Well, they gonna open the show." When we opened the show, we were working with Chuck Jackson. We opened the show. After the first show, this guy Honey Combs, who was the stage manager, came back to the guy that was on the floor, and said they can't open the show. When they open the show, the next 4 or 5 acts that come on can't get their legs together.
It's all over.
You know, because when we come out, we came out on fire, and then we didn't have but 6 minutes. We come out on fire, and we ready or not, here I come, go through all those things, and then boom, it end up boom, dum, 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 pop. I've been trying, and the audience just stopped in, and we do so many spins and drops, and then boom, she's gonna change. I start screaming and hollering, you know. And what really killed it, now the Apollo Theater, we were an unknown group, and the reception was so huge. The very first night, the big crowd of this Chuck Jackson show, we set up in the dressing room. We said, we got to do something that's going to really make us memorable. And it'll always be something that comes off when we got off the stage. And we was in such a frenzy at this particular show, which was the big show before the last show of that night. You know, so the crowd is in there, and people all outside lined up ready to come in, and we opening this show. So we opened the show, and we going off the stage with I've Been Trying, which was my smiling faces back then. That's why I say that. We went out straight up the aisle, up to the Apollo, out the door, around, cross down 125th Street, around the corner, and come back in the back door. Now, all these folks standing out there in line, they're seeing us coming out. They don't know who we are.
Recognize who you are.
But they hear the crowd, and they're just screaming and hollering. They want to know who's these guys, you know. We never rehearsed. We were 3 lead singers, and we took that concept to the stage. You know what to do. If I'm gonna sing lead, I don't rehearse no routines. So we knew each other's steps and movements so well. We get us a little groove.
You still got those steps? You still got...
when Lord and I are on the stage, we pick it up. You know, but most of the time I have to just be me. You know, because I'm not looking for that was part of the act, you know, where it all come together and boom, break out, and then we go into a skit or something else, and it ended up being what it be. And I say all that to say that, you know, I have never, not even to the day, you know, really found that person that I could say, oh, that's me. You know, I still think that, like, my greatest strength is in versatility. You know, I still have my vocals. I'm singing songs that I sang back in the 60s in the same key. You know, I'll be on shows with a lot of Motown acts, and some of the musicians that were around then, they noticed all the other acts changed the keys. I couldn't change the key at all. Yeah, it's like this rehearsal here, the guy was asking me over the phone before I got in California this time, you know, about I said, smiling faces, just do it like the record, and we good, you know. So that I got here late because I had to come from San Diego, and the people that used to sing with me that were here, they know how to go up there and do that song and rehearse it, where it's good for them. They know I can do it, so that was fine.
You just step into it. You just step into it. But we have to now talk about the reason why you are in LA. You've been awarded an award. You've been nominated for an award. Well, you're going to receive an accolade.
Yes,
let's just keep it going.
Yes, it's a very prestigious one. It's from the alumni from Motown, and it's award. Scholarship award for students who are academically good in their creative senses. I'm sure that the award stretches out amongst other things besides just performing arts, you know. But I think that is what the thing is, just to provide the scholarships and the opportunities for younger folks to be able to receive those awards because of their school work and ability. And they've been doing this for quite a few years. In fact, before I moved back to Detroit, I went to a Hell Awards here that were honoring Ray Parker Jr., the Flamingos, Shaka Khan. There were a couple of other folks. I can't remember now all the folks at that time. And I was very impressed. I mean, and the accolades grow very big. And I've seen a lot of friends of mine now who have received the award, and they really feel like this is an accomplishment for them, you know.
So how do you feel, though? How do you feel?
I know. Well, you know what? I think that because, you know, when I got with Motown, Motown had a new leader stepping in up in front of Barry doing a lot of the things, who was Suzanne DePass. She was, you know, the Jackson 5 were there, so she was in that. And at that time, she was the person that suggested we open for the Jackson 5. She's never seen us, you know, but being with Norman and listening to Norman talk, she said, well, once we let them open for the Jackson 5. Well, we went to a couple of Jackson 5's concerts, and I'm not going to say who the folks were there, but both times you can see the audience, when the folks that were opening, the audience was just, we want the Jackson 5, we want the Jackson. A horrible thing to do until one of them come out there and say, please, you know, this, we're bringing you a show, and those folks are setting us up so that we can bring all this entertainment to you. We want you to give them an opportunity and respect, and they start clapping because one of the Jackson 5 would come out there and say that, so they got a chance to. But now, and then Norman said, well, how you going to respond to that? Well, I said, you know what? I'm not going to come out and try to be the Jackson 5.
Yes.
So I went and got real musicians. I mean,
when you say real musicians,
in other
what
words,
does that mean?
when I'm seasoned musicians, you know, and upcoming musicians. I had Leroy Taylor, who was from Nightlighters and ended up being with New Birth. Robert Ward, who was the leader of the Ohio Untouchables and played behind Wilson Pickett and all those folks. I had some seasoned guys on stage with me.
I love the word seasoned.
And they were all performers, you know, when they played, and I could say they were so impressive. The Jackson 5 would come down to be on the stage real early before they and watch our act. Quite a few times, the kids would see them out there and just go crazy, and they would apologize and say, "Well, we won't let them see us," or so, you know, throw the show off. But after that tour, the Jackson 5 started touring with a real band. You know, they had to step up. We had to step up to open for them. They said, well, you know what? Oh, here it is. This is how we're going to do it, you know.
I ain't say nothing.
So, boom. You can't take the cousins and you know, you just teeny bopping was. Michael was coming up too fast, and that tour, that very first tour, Randy, that was the first tour Randy came out on, you know, and that was really something, you know. But I mean, those were the things that. What were we talking about in the subject?
Suzanne just passed helping you out with the all-men show.
Yeah.
About to have.
So, oh yeah, okay, right. So, I mean, all those things, you know, in a nutshell, I was always really trying to find out, how can I work it? How can I be in, how can I bring something to this?
Your own creativity,
yes.
your own talent, your own skill.
And each show, you know, there's always, when I got with Lloyd and Melvin Stewart, Trey Stone and Marcy and Taka, and we had, and just even before them with little Ty Barkley and Calvin Stevenson, we were able to be very creative without having to come in this. We used to be in the studio like this from 12 to what?
We lived it.
6 every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Lloyd Williams is one of the last of the groups that were recorded with me with Norman Whitfield. Yeah, you know, and he's got some history too. He's been modest over there.
So like, the thing is, what I like about yourself and Lloyd is that you've both got an energy. Firstly, an energy of authenticness about you, but also there's this joy about what you did and what you do. And what are the attributes? I'm going back to this word again. But what are the attributes that you feel as a performer, as an artist, that you need to sort of stay in the game and stay authentic in the game? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that for me, when I first started, I mean seriously started, I had seen so much vaudeville, you know, the televisions, you're showing you real people doing real things, and they dressed it. And then from a lot of the things, information-wise, like David Ruffin and guys like that would get, when we would really becoming popular, he would give us the little things, man, y'all need to do this and take that out, do that, and boo. We learned all of that, and we added those things. One of the main attributes were we respected the comments from our peers. A couple of interviews I did, I was telling folks about a guy named Percy Mayfield. We were working a club in Flint, Michigan, and it was a blues club, but we were opening the show for this guy Percy Mayfield. Now at that time I didn't know he was related to Curtis Mayfield, but I knew he was a big blues singer. And when we come off the stage, we all share in the same dressing room. He was like, man, these folks really love you guys. Y'all pretty good. You know, he say, how long have y'all been together? And we at that time told him maybe 3 years, 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he say the key to your career is longevity.
Mm.
He say in those things that I'm telling you, first of all, what you're doing here, and what you guys are doing are all individualistic. Because on that stage, when we got on the stage, it was like, I was expecting to see all this Detroit and Motown routines, and y'all didn't do none of that. And
so that's your uniqueness.
And when we were doing 2 or 3 shows a night, and each night every show would be something different. And he was like, and then the last night when he really told us, he said, I think y'all got a future. He said, because what you're doing, he can see that it's entertaining. I mean, we used to watch guys like the Treniers, you know, the Flamingos, you know, and all those guys, the Chickatail Feather. Wow, there were so many groups back then. We watched the Isley Brothers and Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. We used to go to those concerts where those 2 groups were together, and that was a war. You know, they had so much stuff going on, and personality. That was personality, I would say, is the attribute that I'd lean on more than anything. You know, and the God-given vocal that God gave me, that hasn't changed. See, so, you know, I come out there now, I go to do a date and smile, they say, oh, wow, ain't nothing changed. You sound just like the record. I was like, who am I supposed to sound like? And I look at things like that because I've seen so many folks that were, you know, and voices changed. But you see, I watch Stevie and I watch Michael. Their voices changed too, but they were still able to reach notes. You know, you don't let your voice change and you just say, oh, well, I can't do that like that no more. I'm going to do it like this. When your voice change and those keys change, your song changes. If I sung Smiling Faces in another key, people would not recognize that voice.
Can you give us a bit of a rendition of Smiling Faces? Now, you've already told me twice before that you can't, and you have done so.
Smiling faces sometimes pretend to be your friend. Smiling faces show no traces of the evil that lurks within. Smiling faces, sometimes they don't tell the truth. And I got proof.
I love that. 'Cause I mean, we can continue with this, even around that subject. Thank you so much. So what will you be performing on Sunday? Will you be performing on Sunday?
We're going to do one song. Smiling faces. Now they got all those folks on there, and they say, "Please, we want you to do Smiling Faces." You know, and I never have any problem in doing that. You know, because to be able to even be in there today, I would never discount the value that Smiling Faces has been in my career. It's taking care of me in my life right now. You know, so. Smiling Faces.
Brilliant. And what's just come to me, I don't think we've spoken about this. You are a rock and roll Hall of Famer.
Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame.
A Rhythm and Blues, apologies. Let's rewind that.
3 times.
You're a Rhythm and Blues Hall of Famer.
3
times.
With the Ohio Players, the Fabulous Peps, the Undisputed Truth. I mean, I smile when I sit at home and think like he's sitting home. He's sitting at home with his and just say, whoo. You know, you jump on a train with somebody that's already know where they're going. And the thing, like Norman, if Norman was here, he'd say, jump on, hold on. You know, because he knew that there's going to be a whole lot of folks that are going along the way trying to get on. And if you slide a little bit, they're gonna move you on off that train.
Absolutely.
So you hold on.
Definitely.
He'll tell you, you know, because I watched when Norman brought him. He was like, you know, Joe getting a little old. Maybe we can get somebody in here to take his place. I said, huh? I said, so let me give him something to think about.
Absolutely.
And then after a while, when we be on stage, a lot of times I see him cut his eyes over that man. He shake his head, yeah, okay.
Trying to get as much as I can. We'll be right on. Absolutely.
He said, yeah, okay, I see what's happening. So, you know, we just started clicking, and now we live the legacy of Norman Whitfield. We try to put that into what we do. We know that if we do that well, we could have a career.
Fantastic. And in winding down, Joe, for anyone, and I always ask this question because I'm very much about empowerment and inspiring people to just get up and do. And it's not always easy, but it's possible. Firstly, before we wind down, can you just share some of the challenges that you've experienced on this journey, and then a quote or word of inspiration that you can leave with people to say, just do it?
Oh, wow. I mean, there's always been challenges because, see, first of all, you know, after we became a self-contained unit, you have a lot of folks, you know, that we all are depending on one another. We were fortunate enough that most of the time that everybody was 110% in, you know, and the theory, and even in that little nudge that you would say that for somebody to linger on is something that we got from Norman Whitfield. And he would sit down like we were all being there together, and he would sit down, and after he gets through building and hyping and everybody up, and they'd be doing this and ready to go, he'll look at everybody and say, everybody ain't gonna make it.
Absolutely.
And then what that puts in your head is, it ain't gonna be me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be
Step
here.
up.
So that puts everybody on notice for their own thing. We're coming out. Yeah.
Okay.
On notice for their own outside.
Okay.
Yeah, they got another act.
All right.